The sound of tearing rubber ripped through the dawn like a scream. The knife in Mason Hale's trembling hand sliced into the final tire, air hissing out in a furious sigh. His reflection wavered in the glossy black paint of the CEO's car, a sleek midnight blue Tesla that gleamed under the parking lot lights. He stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping down the side of his temple despite the cold morning air. For a second, silence, just the sound of his own pulse thudding in his ears. Then came the crack of guilt, the sickening, slow realization of what he'd done. He dropped the knife. It clattered on the asphalt, metal echoing like a gunshot in the emptiness of the underground parking lot. Mason wiped his hands on his janitor's overalls, leaving dark smears of grease and regret. He looked up toward the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking, recording everything, and whispered, "Good. Let her see what she made me do." Because this wasn't just about tires. It was about betrayal. Just 12 hours earlier, he'd been standing in the same building, cleaning up spilled coffee outside the CEO's glass-walled office, trying not to listen, trying not to hear her laugh. Elena Carson, 36, CEO of Carson Tech, ruthless in heels, brilliant under pressure, and, up until last week, someone Mason thought he'd begun to understand. He'd been the invisible man of her world, the one who fixed a jam printer at 3 a.m., replaced her office bulbs, brought her coffee when everyone else was too intimidated to speak. She had smiled at him, really smiled, and for a while, that had been enough. Enough to make him believe that maybe kindness wasn't extinct in people like her. Until the lie. Until last night. Now, standing in the echo of his own crime, Mason closed his eyes. The image wouldn't leave him. The flicker of a silhouette through a penthouse window, another man's coat slung carelessly over her armchair, her laughter soft and careless. It wasn't just about jealousy. It was about deceit. Because the man she was with wasn't just anyone. It was Victor Raines, the same man who had destroyed Mason's life 2 years ago. He didn't plan this. Not really. He hadn't gone to the garage intending to vandalize property or commit a felony. He'd gone to hand in his resignation letter. But something in him had cracked when he saw Elena's car sitting there under the fluorescent lights, her pristine license plate reflecting his face back at him, like a mirror he couldn't escape. Now, he stood amid the wreckage of his own impulsive fury. A soft sound broke the silence. "Mason." He froze. Elena's voice. She stood at the entrance of the parking garage, her heels clicking against the concrete as she walked toward him. She wasn't dressed in her usual perfection this morning. Her blazer was missing, her blouse half-tucked, and her hair, usually sculpted into a flawless bun, was loose around her shoulders. And in her eyes, confusion, then something sharper. "Mason," she repeated, this time harder. What did you do?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His tongue felt like sandpaper. Her gaze darted to the tires, 4 of them, slashed clean, then to the knife lying nearby, then back to him. "Oh my God," she whispered. He took a step back, shame and adrenaline flooding through him. "You shouldn't have lied to me." "What are you talking about?" she asked, voice trembling, eyes wide. "You told me you weren't like him." The way her face shifted, first confusion, then recognition, then fear, told him everything. "Mason," she said quietly, "this isn't what you think." He laughed, a hollow sound. "Isn't it? You didn't have dinner with Victor Raines last night." Her silence answered for her. He turned away, running a hand over his face. The faint smell of rubber and gasoline clung to him. "You knew what he did to me," he said, his voice breaking. "You knew what that man cost me. And you still—" "I had no choice," she cut in, stepping closer. Her voice was urgent now, shaking. "You don't understand. It wasn't personal." "Not personal." He spun around, fury flashing in his eyes. "Here's the reason I lost my company. My marriage. My life. You knew that, Elena. You sat in your office and listened to me tell you everything about what he did, and you went to him anyway." Tears welled in her eyes, glistening under the cold fluorescent lights. "You think I wanted to. I think you wanted whatever he was offering." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what he's capable of." Neither did you, apparently. They stood there, the tension between them thick enough to choke on. The air hummed with the hum of the ventilation system and the far-off sound of a car alarm from the street above. Elena looked at him, her lips trembling. "Mason, if you just listen to me." "Don't," he said, cutting her off, his voice raw. "Don't make me regret trusting you more than anyone else." She flinched, the words hitting harder than he intended. A moment passed. Then her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. Another buzz. Persistent. Finally, she pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Her face drained of color. "Mason," she whispered, "we need to leave. Now." He frowned. "What?" But before she could answer, the elevator doors at the end of the garage opened. Two men in suits stepped out, their eyes scanning the space. One of them spoke into an earpiece. "Target located." Elena's breath caught. She grabbed Mason's arm. "Run." He didn't move. "Elena, what's going on?" "They are not security," she hissed, voice trembling. "They are Victor's men." The men started walking toward them, purposeful, silent, like shadows. Mason's heart slammed against his ribs. He could see the metallic glint of something holstered at one man's waist. He didn't know whether to laugh or panic. Just an hour ago, he'd been ready to turn himself in for vandalism. Now, somehow, he was standing in the middle of a parking lot with the CEO he'd just betrayed, being hunted by the man who destroyed him years ago. "Elena," he whispered, voice low, "what did you do?" She looked at him, eyes wide and glassy. "I stole something from him." "What?" "Proof," she said. "Proof of what he did to you." Then, as the footsteps drew close and the men's shadows stretched long across the concrete, Mason realized the truth hit harder than the guilt ever could. He hadn't slashed Elena's tires out of hatred. He'd done it out of love twisted by betrayal. And now, somehow, he'd just ruined the only person who might have been trying to save him. Mason didn't have time to think. Elena's hand was already gripping his arm, pulling him toward the emergency exit. Her heels clacked furiously on the concrete as she half-dragged, half-ran beside him. Behind them, the echo of boots grew louder. "Left," she gasped. They sprinted through the narrow corridor that led toward the loading docks. Mason's lungs boned. His heartbeat pounded in his ears like thunder. The sound of shouts ricocheted through the garage, followed by the distant metallic snap of a gun being cocked. "What the hell is happening?" he hissed. "I'll explain later." "Later," he barked, stumbling as they turned a corner. "Elena, I just destroyed your car. I think you owe me now." She stopped so suddenly he nearly ran into her. "If you don't move," she whispered, eyes flicking toward the corner they'd come from, "we'll both be dead before sunrise." That silenced him. They ducked behind a stack of cardboard boxes and crouched, breathing hard. The dim yellow security lights flickered overhead, painting their faces in jittery pulses. Mason looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd appeared. There were smudges beneath her eyes, her blouse wrinkled, a faint bruise on her wrist. The powerful CEO who had always moved like a storm through polished glass offices looked frightened. "Elena," he whispered, "what proof? What are you talking about?" Her eyes darted toward the sound of footsteps again. She leaned closer. "You were right about Victor. About everything. He framed you to get your software rights, then buried the evidence. But I found it." Mason froze. "You, what?" She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive, the small device glinting in her shaking hand. "It's all here. Contracts, emails, payments, everything." Mason's throat tightened. For a year, he'd begged people to believe him. He'd gone from being a startup founder with promise to a janitor with a record, all because Victor Raines, the golden CEO, had decided Mason's invention was worth stealing. And now, this? "You have proof," he said slowly, struggling to believe it. "You stole it." "Yes." He blinked. "From him." "I was working with his company on a merger," she said quickly. "He trusted me. He let me into his private servers." Mason's brain reeled. "And now his men are cleaning up the mess," she finished grimly. "And they'll kill anyone who gets in their way." The footsteps grew louder. A voice, cold, calm, cut through the air. "Elena," one of the men called. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. She tensed, clutching the flash drive tighter. Mason reached instinctively for her hand. We have to go. Where? He thought fast. The maintenance elevator. It leads to the back alley behind the storage wing. No cameras. She hesitated, then nodded. They moved again. Quiet, quick. Mason led the way, weaving through the maze of concrete pillars and emergency lighting. He'd spent years cleaning this building. He knew every vent, every forgotten stairwell. Behind them, the men's voices echoed closer. She's here somewhere. Check the north wing. As they reached the maintenance door, Mason swiped his janitor's access card. The lock clicked, and they slipped inside. The elevator shuddered as it began to rise. The walls were metal, the air heavy with the smell of oil and old machinery. Elena leaned against the corner, breathing unevenly. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered. Mason stared at the floor, the flickering light casting strange shadows on his face. You shouldn't have gotten involved. You didn't owe me anything. Her eyes found his. You don't get it. I owed myself the truth. He turned to her, frowning. Why? Because I helped him destroy you. The words hit harder than a punch. Mason's body stiffened. He turned to face her, disbelief twisting into something darker. What did you just say? She looked away, voice cracking. I was part of it. 2 years ago, I was one of the board members who approved Victor's acquisition of your company. I signed off on it. He felt the air leave his lungs. You, what? I didn't know what he planned to do. I thought it was just a buyout, a partnership. But when you went bankrupt, when your wife left, when everything fell apart, I realized what we'd done. Mason's hands clenched into fists. You knew, and you? I didn't know until it was too late, she cried. And by then, he was untouchable. I couldn't fix it, not without proof. The elevator jolted to a stop. Silence swallowed the air between them. Mason's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. He wanted to yell, to throw something, to hate her. But beneath the anger, something else flickered, something like recognition. He knew what guilt felt like. It was the same poison that had eaten him alive for years. The doors creaked open. Cold morning air rushed in. The alleyway behind the building was quiet, except for the hum of distant traffic. Mason stepped out first, scanning the shadows. We're clear, he said softly. Elena followed, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. For a moment, they stood there, the city rising above them in steel and glass, the sunrise barely brushing the horizon. What happens now? He asked. We get this to the police, she said. Or the press. Someone who can expose him. He gave a bitter laugh. You think they'll listen to a janitor and a CEO who just committed corporate espionage? She smiled faintly. If the evidence is real enough, they'll have no choice. He was about to respond when a sharp crack split the air. Glass shattered beside them. Elena gasped and ducked, clutching her shoulder. Mason dropped to the ground, dragging her behind a dumpster. Sniper, he hissed. Blood seeped through her blouse, staining the white fabric crimson. Elena. I'm fine, she groaned, though her face was pale. He found us. Mason's mind raced. They were exposed. No backup, no plan. Just him, a wounded CEO, and the flash drive that could end Victor Reigns' empire, or end them first. He tore off part of his sleeve and pressed it against her wound. You're losing blood. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. You should go. Take the drive. Run. Not a chance, he said. I've already lost too much because of that man. I'm not losing you too. She looked at him then, through the pain, through the chaos, and there was something in her gaze that made the world tilt. Mason, she whispered. But before she could finish, a car engine roared from the far end of the alley. Headlights blazed alive. The same men from the garage stepped out, their silhouettes framed in the white glare. And in that moment, as Mason helped Elena to her feet, the full weight of his earlier mistake crashed down on him. He'd slashed her tires, her only escape route, without realizing that the real betrayal wasn't his. It was his own. Mason's breath steamed in the cold air as the headlights cut across the alley. He could see the two men, broad, calm, armed, moving with the deliberate ease of professionals. One held a radio, the other a silenced pistol that gleamed faintly in the half-light. He glanced at Elena. Her face was pale, lips trembling, but her eyes, God, her eyes were fierce. She still clutched a flash drive in her fist, her knuckles white. "They are blocking the exit," she whispered. Mason scanned the alley. Trash bins, a half-open fire escape ladder, the broken shadow of a loading dock. "We go up," he said. She hesitated, swaying slightly. "I can't. My shoulder." He caught her arm before she fell. "You can," he said softly. "You have to." Her eyes searched his face, and something raw flickered between them. Then she nodded. Mason grabbed a rusted metal pipe and jammed it under the fire escape ladder, pulling it down with a screech of iron. The sound echoed through the alley like an alarm. The men looked up. "Move!" Mason hissed. Elena started climbing, one arm clinging to the rung, the other pressed to her wound. Mason followed close behind, every muscle tensed. A bullet cracked the wall near his head, spraying dust and debris. "Faster!" "I'm trying," she gasped. They reached the first landing just as another shot rang out. Mason turned, spotting the men below, one of them now crouched, aiming. Mason grabbed a loose brick and hurled it down. It struck the man's shoulder, enough to knock him off balance. Elena reached the rooftop first, collapsing onto the gravel. Mason pulled himself up after her, panting, heart hammering. The roof stretched wide and empty, bordered by low concrete walls. Beyond, the city sprawled, a web of light and glass just waking up to another day. "Come on," he said, pulling her toward a ventilation shaft. "We can cross to the next building from there." She nodded weakly, gripping his arm for support. Her face had gone a shade too pale. Mason ripped off his outer shirt and pressed it against her wound again, tying it tightly. "Keep pressure on it." She exhaled shakily. "You're good at this." "Running for your life?" "Yeah, I've had practice." Her lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile, even as she winced. "You weren't always a janitor, were you?" He looked away. "No." A silence settled, heavy and knowing. The kind of silence that happens when the past you tried to bury suddenly stands next to you, breathing down your neck. He hadn't told anyone the whole story, not even her. He'd been an engineer, a father, a husband. He'd built a prototype software that used predictive algorithms to detect cyber threats before they occurred, a breakthrough Victor Reigns had stolen. When Mason tried to fight back, he was sued into oblivion, labeled unstable, blacklisted, and left to rot while his wife took their son and left. He had lost everything. And now he was here, standing beside the woman who might have helped destroy him, yet was bleeding for him now. Elena's voice broke through his thoughts. "We can't stay here. If they have a tracker on me." "They'll find us," he finished. "I know." He helped her to her feet, and they made their way toward the edge of the building. The next rooftop was about 8 feet across, separated by a narrow gap. The drop below was dizzying. "You think we can make that?" she asked. "I'll go first." He took a few steps back, ran, and jumped, landing hard on the next roof, rolling to absorb the impact. When he stood and looked back, Elena was staring at the gap, fear flickering across her face. "Elena, you can do this." Trust me." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and leapt. For a split second, her silhouette hung against the sunrise, then her foot slipped. Mason lunged forward, catching her hand just before she fell. The momentum dragged him down to one knee, pain flaring through his arm. "Hold on," he shouted. Her grip trembled, slipping. Her wounded shoulder bled fresh through the fabric. "Mason, don't you dare let go," he growled, pulling with everything he had. With a final heave, he dragged her over the ledge, both collapsing onto the rooftop, gasping. They lay there for a long moment, neither speaking, the city noise distant below them. Mason felt her trembling against him, her heartbeat rapid and fragile. "You saved me," she whispered finally. He swallowed hard. "Guess we're even." She laughed, a small, breathless sound that felt like light cutting through fog. But the moment was short-lived. From below came the echo of car doors slamming and voices shouting orders into radios. "They're not giving up," Mason muttered. Elena pushed herself up, leaning against the vent. Then we don't either. He glanced at her. You sure you're up for this? Her eyes met his, pale blue, fierce despite the pain. I started this, Mason. I'm finishing it. Something inside him shifted then. A small, quiet piece of the bitterness he carried for years began to crumble. Maybe she wasn't the villain he'd made her out to be. Maybe she was just another person caught in the web Victor had spun around them all. They moved across the rooftop, jumping another small gap to reach the stairwell access of a neighboring building. Mason forced the lock open with a screwdriver from his pocket and led her inside. The stairwell smelled of rust and damp air. It was quiet except for their footsteps. On the third-floor landing, Elena stopped. Mason. He toned. She reached into her coat and pulled out the flash drive again, pressing it into his hand. If anything happens to me, don't start that. Please, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You can clear your name with this. Protect your son. You deserve that much. He froze. You know about Noah? She nodded. I looked you up before I hired you. His chest tightened. Why? Because I wanted to understand the man Victor destroyed. The man I helped destroy. He stared at her, his anger dissolving into something more complex, something that hurt worse than rage. Elena. A noise below cut him off, the metallic clack of a door swinging open. They're here, she breathed. Mason pocketed the drive. Then we go up. They climbed to the roof access door, bursting into the morning light once more. The city skyline stretched around them, glass towers catching sun. Helicopter blades thumped faintly in the distance. Elena turned toward him, wind whipping her hair. Mason, there's something I need to tell you. He frowned. What now? I wasn't meeting Victor for business last night, she said. He found out what I stole. He told me, if I didn't give it back, he'd go after you. What? He knew you worked for me, he said. He said he'd finish what he started. Mason's stomach twisted. So you lied to protect me. She nodded, and now it's too late. Before he could respond, a shout rose from the next rooftop. The two men had spotted them again. Mason's mind raced. They were running out of buildings, out of options, but not out of fight. He turned to her, jaw set. You trust me? She nodded once. Then hold on tight. He grabbed her hand, and together they ran toward the ledge again, the city roaring beneath them, two broken lives tangled in one last desperate sprint toward redemption. The wind howled between the buildings as Mason and Elena sprinted toward the ledge. Every step echoed like a countdown. The rooftop beneath them sloped slightly toward the edge, gravel scattering beneath their boots. Behind them, the sharp pop of a gunshot cracked through the air, a bullet whizzing past Mason's shoulder and sparking against a metal vent. Jump! Mason shouted. Elena didn't hesitate this time. Together they leapt across the narrow divide, the world tilting for one dizzying second before their feet hit solid ground again. Mason stumbled but caught her before she fell. Behind them, shouts filled the air. The men were closing in. This way! Mason pulled her toward a stairwell door. It was padlocked. Without hesitation, he swung a steel pipe from the rooftop against the lock. Once. Twice. The metal cracked open on the third hit. They rushed down the dark stairwell, footsteps pounding. Mason's breathing was harsh and ragged, but his mind was racing faster. Elena was fading. Her face was slick with sweat, and the blood from her shoulder had soaked through his makeshift bandage. We need to get you to a hospital, he said. No. Elena. If we go to any hospital, they'll find us. Victor owns half the city. He stopped on the landing, chest heaving. Then where? There's someone I can trust. Her voice was weak but determined. She leaned heavily on the railing. An old contact. Journalist. Name's Riley Keene. She's been investigating Victor for years. Mason thought fast. Where? East Quarter. Near the old subway depot. That's across town. I know. Mason rubbed his face. Fine, but you're not walking there. He glanced down the stairwell, then at the maintenance window overlooking the street below. A delivery van idled near the curb. He grinned faintly. Lucky day. Moments later, they were on the street. Mason used his janitor's pass key, an old relic he'd never returned, to open the side gate and slip them out. The early morning traffic was thin, fog still curling low over the pavement. He forced open the back of the van and helped Elena inside, covering her with a tarp. Then he climbed into the driver's seat, hot-wired the ignition, and pulled into the street just as two black sedans turned the corner behind them. The chase was on. "Hold on!" he shouted, swerving sharply as the first car accelerated. Bullets shattered the rear window. Mason ducked instinctively, gripping the wheel tighter. Elena winced but stayed down. They are not giving up. No kidding. He took a hard right, the van skidding across wet asphalt. Horns blared as he cut across an intersection, narrowly avoiding a delivery truck. The sedan stayed close, weaving through traffic like sharks tracking blood. Mason's pulse thundered. His mind was a storm of focus and rage. Every instinct screamed survival. But beneath that was something else, a fire that had burned quietly for 2 years. This was the man who had taken everything from him. The man who had broken his family, his career, his future. And now Victor wanted to finish the job. Not this time. Mason jerked the steering wheel and plunged into a side street, the van bouncing over potholes. The GPS voice in the dashboard flickered to life from a previous route, his cleaning shift schedule. Turn right on. He slammed the device off. Where are we going? Elena gasped, losing them. He took another turn, then another, zigzagging through narrow alleys until the sound of engines faded behind them. Finally, he parked beneath a rusted overpass, cutting the headlights. Silence, only the ticking of the cooling engine. Elena groaned softly. Mason crawled to the back and checked her wound. It was worse, dark, seeping, her skin pale. "We can't wait," he said quietly. "You'll bleed out." She looked at him, eyes half open but steady. "Mason, listen." He met her gaze. "If you don't make it to Riley, promise me you'll keep the flash drive safe." "Stop." "Promise me." He swallowed hard. "I'm not letting you die, Elena." Her lips curved faintly. "You still think you get to decide that?" Mason felt a strange ache in his chest. She was joking, barely, but beneath it was something raw, defiant, and human. He realized then that she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for him, too. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're gonna be okay." Her breath hitched. "You always say that like you believe it." "Because I do." She blinked slowly, exhaustion settling over her. "Mason." "Yeah. I never lied about what I saw in you, even when I was pretending to be like them." His throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "I did," she interrupted softly, "because you reminded me what honesty looks like." Before he could respond, a sound cut through the air, tires screeching. Mason froze. Through the cracked rear window, he saw headlights sweeping through the underpass. The sedans had found them again. "Damn it!" He turned back to her. "Elena, stay down." "What are you going to do?" He clenched his jaw. "End this." He reached for the flash drive she'd given him earlier, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and slipped out of the van. The night was damp and cold. He crouched behind a pillar, watching the first car roll to a stop. The men stepped out, scanning the shadows. He could hear them talking. Orders are to bring her in alive. And him. A pause. Doesn't matter. Mason's pulse slowed. He moved quietly to the rear of the van, gripping a broken tire iron he'd found earlier. One of the men rounded the corner, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Mason waited, then struck. The impact was fast, brutal. The man collapsed without a sound. The second shouted and fired, bullets sparking off the concrete. Mason ducked behind a pillar, his heart hammering. He counted the shots. 3, 4, then silence. He moved. Another swing. Another hit. The gun skittered across the pavement. Mason grabbed it, breathing hard. The second man groaned but didn't move again. He leaned against the van, trying to steady his breath. His hands shook, not from fear, but adrenaline. Then, from behind him, a voice he hadn't heard in 2 years. Smooth, cold, venomous. Well, it said, you've learned a few tricks since the last time we met. Mason turned slowly. Victor Rain stood 10 feet away, dressed in a charcoal suit and leather gloves, the morning light catching his eyes, a cool, almost amused gray. "Hello, Mason," Victor said, smiling faintly. "Long time." Mason's jaw tightened. "Not long enough." Victor took a step forward, calm as ever. "You know, you really shouldn't make a habit of attacking my employees." "Then stop sending them to kill people." Victor chuckled softly. "Kill? Don't be dramatic. I just wanted to talk." "Sure," Mason said, voice steady but laced with fury. "Like you talked me out of my company." Victor tilted his head. "Still bitter, I see. Still a thief, I see." Victor's smile didn't fade. "You really should be thanking me. You were never built for success, Mason. You had the brains, yes, but not the stomach. I simply put your work to better use. You ruined my life." Victor shrugged. "Collateral damage." Mason took a slow step forward, gun still in his hand. "You're not getting that drive." "Ah," Victor said softly, eyes glinting. "So Elena told you." "She told me everything." "Then you know she's lying." Mason frowned. Victor smiled wider. "You think she's your savior, don't you? You think she's risking her life for you? Mason, she's been working for me since the beginning." Mason froze. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Who do you think brought you here? Who do you think made sure you found her last night?" Mason's pulse roared in his ears. "She didn't steal from me," Victor said. "She delivered." The world seemed to tilt. Mason gripped the gun tighter, confusion and fury crashing into each other like waves. "She's lying to you," Victor whispered, "just like she lied to me." Mason felt something inside him crack again, like a splinter of old pain rising to the surface. And in that moment, from inside the van, he heard Elena's weak voice, barely a whisper but filled with everything Victor wasn't expecting. "Is lying, Mason. Don't listen." Victor sighed. "Ah, so she is awake." Mason's hand trembled on the trigger, and then Victor raised his own gun, aimed it at the van, and said, almost casually, "Then let's end this charade, shall we?" Mason didn't think. He just moved. The police lights painted the entire parking lot in red and blue, flashing against the puddles like a warning from fate itself. The rain had turned to a fine mist, soaking the shoulders of everyone standing there. Alex stood in the shadows by the maintenance shed, his chest rising and falling with a kind of fury that didn't know where to land anymore. He had only wanted to make her understand, to make her feel something close to the wreckage she'd caused. Slashing the tires was stupid, yes, but it wasn't rage, it was desperation. A cry from a man who'd lost every ounce of control he used to have. He watched as the tow truck lifted Claire's black sedan onto the bed. The CEO herself stood beside the officer, her cream trench coat clinging to her jaw trembling with what looked like disbelief rather than anger. Then her eyes swept the lot, and stopped. They met his. For one breathless second, neither moved. Then the officer beside her turned, following her gaze. Alex stepped forward. "It was me," he said, before anyone could ask. His voice cut through the wet silence. "I did it." The officer blinked. "Sir, you?" "Yes," Alex said. His throat burned. "I cut her tires." Claire's lips parted, rain dripping from her lashes. "Why, Alex? Why would you?" He almost said it. "Because you ruined me. Because you used me like a disposable secret. Because you made me believe in something real when all it was strategy." But when he opened his mouth, what came out instead was a single, hollow truth. "Because I needed you to stop pretending nothing happened." The officer moved closer, asking questions he barely heard. He saw her expression shift. Shock, guilt, something like pity, and that was worse than anger. He was handcuffed without resistance. Claire followed, trying to speak, but every word drowned in the rain. He heard snippets. "I'll handle this. No charges. It's not what you think." But none of it mattered anymore. Inside the police car, Alex leaned his head against the cold window. Through the distortion of water, he saw her silhouette standing alone by the car, arms wrapped around herself. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking past him, at the man in the gray suit who had just stepped out of the building. Ethan Shaw, Claire's partner. The one whose name had been on every memo, every dinner receipt, every text thread labeled strategy. Alex's stomach knotted. Even from this distance, he could tell, the way she tilted her face up toward Ethan, the way Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, that there was something intimate there, something practiced, something that didn't belong in boardrooms or business talk. His pulse hammered. Maybe this was what he'd been blind to all along. Maybe he wasn't a betrayal. Maybe he was just a distraction from one much deeper. As the car started moving, his heart sank into that thought like a stone in a lake. The next morning, the sky was an exhausted gray. The air carried that faint, sour smell of damp concrete after rain. Alex sat in the holding cell, staring at the floor until the metal door opened and a familiar voice filled the space. "You can go." He looked up. Claire stood there, pale but composed, holding paperwork in one hand. "I dropped the charges," she said quietly. "You're free to leave." He rose slowly. "Why bother?" Her jaw tightened. "Because I don't want to destroy what's left of your life." He laughed, but it came out brittle. "You already did." She didn't answer, only stepped aside to let him walk past. The hallway outside smelled like disinfectant and stale air. "Alex," she called, just as he reached the door. He turned, weary. "I didn't betray you," she said, voice low. "Not in the way you think." His breath caught. "Then what way did you betray me, Claire?" Her expression shifted, shadows chasing across her face. "There are things happening in this company you don't understand. People using both of us." He stared at her, trying to read between the cracks. "Then tell me the truth." "I can't. Not yet." She hesitated, then added, "Just don't make this worse for yourself. Please." For a moment, she looked like the woman he used to see in the quiet hours of the janitor's corridor, human, trembling, full of something she couldn't say aloud. Then she turned and walked away, heels echoing down the sterile hall. Alex stepped outside, the cold air slicing through him like a knife. He wasn't sure which was heavier, the humiliation, or the sense that he still didn't have the full story. All he knew was that something beneath the betrayal was beginning to move, like a shadow rising from under the floorboards. And for the first time since it all began, he wasn't sure he wanted to know what it was. The next week passed like a fever dream, slow, sick, and sticky with unspoken questions. Alex went back to work at the night shift, though everyone in the building knew what had happened. They didn't say it aloud, but their eyes did. The whispers that stopped when he entered the hallway, the cautious smiles that pretended not to pity him. It was all part of the quiet crucifixion that comes after public shame. Still, he kept his head down. He needed the paycheck. He needed normalcy. Every night, he mopped the marble floors of Shaw and Hunt Holdings, the city's most ruthless investment firm, pretending not to notice how his reflection looked smaller under the fluorescent lights. But beneath the surface of routine, something had changed. The air itself seemed to hum differently. Security guards started standing at odd places. Doors that were once open were now keycard only. And Claire, she wasn't seen leaving through the main lobby anymore. It was as if she had vanished into the architecture of the building she ruled. Then, one night, it happened again. At 2:17 a.m., while cleaning the 14th floor boardroom, Alex heard the faint click of a door down the corridor. Not the casual kind. The kind that's deliberate, hidden, guilty. He turned off his mop bucket, holding still. The floor was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation. Then came footsteps, 2 sets. A woman's heels, a man's shoes, and then a voice. Hers. "Claire, this can't go on. Ethan, you promised me you'd handle it." "I am handling it," came Ethan Shaw's low, controlled voice. "But not if your janitor boyfriend keeps making scenes in parking lots." "Don't call him that." "Oh? What should I call him? Claire? The liability you slept with to feel something." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the glass walls. Alex's pulse thundered in his ears. He pressed closer to the hallway wall, just near enough to see the reflection of their silhouettes in the glass panel. Claire was standing close to Ethan. Too close, her posture torn between defiance and desperation. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "You told me the deal would be clean. No collateral." Ethan scoffed. "You think emotions are collateral? You're CEO now. Act like one." She slapped him. The sound echoed, stunningly loud. But Ethan didn't flinch. He leaned closer, his tone icy. "You forget who made you that CEO. Don't ever test me again." Then he turned and walked away, his reflection stretching like a ghost in the glass as he disappeared down the corridor. Claire stood still for a long moment, shoulders shaking. Then she did something that almost broke Alex completely. She began to cry. Not the restrained, silent tears of a woman who wanted to stay composed, but the broken sobs of someone whose armor had finally split. Alex's chest ached. He wanted to hate her. He wanted to step out and confront her, to ask what all this was, who she really was. But he couldn't move. He just stood there, watching the woman who had wrecked his life crumble in the dark hallway of her own kingdom. Finally, she straightened, wiped her tears, pulled her phone from her pocket, and whispered shakily, "It's me. He's going to bury everything. We need to act now." Then she hung up and walked toward the elevator. When the doors closed, Alex stepped out from the shadows, staring at the place where she'd stood. His mind spun with the fragments of what he'd just heard. Ethan, the deal, the fear in her voice. This wasn't just betrayal. This was danger. The next day, Alex went to see someone he hadn't spoken to in months. His brother, Jordan. Jordan worked as a journalist for a local paper. He'd always told Alex to stay away from corporate secrets, saying that big companies like Shaw and Hunt played dirtier than anyone imagined. Now, Alex finally understood what that meant. When he arrived at Jordan's cramped apartment, his brother opened the door with a smirk. "You look like hell. I need your help." "That's new." Alex told him everything, from the affair to the slashed tires to the conversation he overheard. When he finished, Jordan leaned back, arms folded. "So you think your CEO X is being blackmailed by her business partner?" "She didn't sound like she was being blackmailed," Alex said. "More like controlled. Trapped." Jordan frowned, tapping his chin. "Ethan Shaw, the same guy who's been pushing that offshore investment deal." "Yeah." Jordan's eyes lit up. "That deal's been on my radar for months. Money disappearing through shell companies, fake acquisitions, classic laundering pattern, but no proof." He looked at Alex carefully. "If she's in this, you're in danger too." Alex exhaled. "I already am." Jordan got up, pacing. "If you want out, you need evidence. Something solid tying Shaw to the fraud. Something inside the company." "I have access," Alex said slowly. "Every floor, every room, every night." Jordan's gaze sharpened. "Then maybe it's time to stop cleaning up their messes and start exposing them." Alex hesitated. He didn't know if this was revenge, redemption, or just madness. But deep down, something in him clicked, the same instinct that had once made him loyal to Claire. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was going to find out the truth. The next few nights were the longest of Alex's life. Every shift, he moved through the building like a shadow, cleaning where cameras could see him and slipping away when they couldn't. His mop bucket and cleaning cart became camouflage, an excuse to linger near locked rooms, to note patterns, to listen. Shaw and Hunt was spotless on the outside, but beneath the glass and marble, it smelled of something rotten. Hidden deals, whispered threats, and fear. He started small. Copies of confidential memos left on printers. Folders marked private. Client fund transfers. The word didn't mean much until he began connecting dots. Accounts rerouted through offshore banks, coded payments linked to shell corporations, names disguised under numbers. And in every single document, one signature kept reappearing. Claire Hunt. It didn't make sense. She couldn't be the one orchestrating this. The woman he knew, or thought he knew, wasn't cold enough to build an empire on deception. But the evidence didn't lie. Until, one night, he found something that changed everything. It was in her office, long after midnight. Her door was locked. It always was. But Alex had keys. He'd cleaned that room every week for years before she ever became CEO. The air inside smelled faintly of a perfume, the citrus and amber scent that used to make his hands tremble when she passed by. On her desk sat a sleek, black laptop, still open, still glowing. A document was visible on the screen, one that made his heart drop. Subject, transfer confirmation. Amount, $4.6 million. Recipient, EN Trust Holdings, eShore. Authorization, C. Hunt. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, trembling, he clicked another file, this one labeled Contingency. It was a list. Names, dates, and notes, all written in Claire's hand. The first entry read, if Ethan moved without approval, trigger exposure protocol. Contact J.D. J.D. Jordan Davis. His brother. Alex's pulse spiked. She knew about his brother. He scrolled further. One line stood out. Alex may become a liability. Protect him until safe. The room tilted. His breath came short. She'd been trying to protect him. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. He froze, closing the laptop, slipping behind the curtains just as a door clicked open. Claire stepped in. Alone. Exhausted. The power heels and tailored confidence were gone, replaced by bare feet, a mess of bun, and eyes that had clearly forgotten sleep. She poured herself a drink from a minibar, staring out the window over the city. Then, softly, why did you come back here, Alex? His heart stopped. He hadn't made a sound. She turned slightly, eyes scanning the shadows. You're not as invisible as you think. He stepped out slowly, guilt written all over him. I had to know. She sighed, setting her glass down. And what did you find? Your signature, he said. On transfers, offshore accounts, millions, you and Ethan. She cut him off sharply. Me and Ethan are not partners. We're enemies trapped in the same box. He frowned. Then why does it look like you're helping him? Her gaze dropped. Because if I don't, he'll destroy the company and everyone who's ever worked for it, including you. He stayed, torn between disbelief and the faint flicker of hope. So what's the truth? Claire. She hesitated, then crossed to her desk and unlocked the drawer. From inside, she pulled a thick envelope and tossed it onto the table. Inside were photos, candid shots of Ethan with government officials, briefcases exchanged in dark corners, contracts signed under fake names. His laundering millions through our firm, she said, using me as a legal front. Every document I sign is a shield for his crimes. And you went along with it. I didn't have a choice. Her voice cracked. He has something on me. Something from before I became CEO. What? She turned away. A mistake. A debt. A secret that could bury me. Alex clenched his fists. You could have told me. You wouldn't have believed me, she whispered. Not after what I did to you. He stepped closer, voice trembling. Why did you do it, Claire? Why the lies? Why make me think? That I cared, she cut in, her eyes glistening. Because I did. That's what made it worse. Silence fell. Outside, the city pulsed with life, distant sirens, wind against glass, the low hum of neon. Then she said, barely audible, You were the only person who ever saw me. Not the CEO, not the strategist, just me. He swallowed hard. And you still broke me. Her jaw trembled. I had to choose between saving one person and saving hundreds. I chose wrong. The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. This contains everything, evidence of the laundering, the shell accounts, the politicians. If you want revenge, give it to your brother. If you want to save me, you'll keep it safe until I'm gone. Gone. I'm turning myself in, she said quietly, but not before I end him. Alex stared at her, realization dawning. You're going to confront Ethan. Her silence was answer enough. He reached out, grabbing her arm. You can't go alone. She looked up, eyes fierce and full of the kind of resolve that terrified him. I already am. Then she pulled away and walked out the door. Alex stood frozen, the flash drive warm in his hand. A piece of the truth, and maybe the last piece of her. For the first time, He didn't know whether he wanted to stop her or follow her into the storm. The city slept uneasily that night. The sky was a sheet of black glass, broken only by the occasional flare of lightning in the distance, a storm rolling toward the skyline like a premonition. Alex drove through empty streets, one hand gripping the flash drive in his pocket, the other tight on the steering wheel. He didn't know where Claire was going, but he could guess. Ethan Shore's private residence, a penthouse on the 47th floor of the Obsidian Tower, the same building that loomed over downtown like a dark crown. He remembered her tone when she said, "I'm turning myself in, but not before I end him." He knew that tone. It wasn't vengeance. It was surrender dressed as purpose. And he couldn't let her face that alone. He pulled up to the tower's underground parking just before midnight. A single security guard was posted at the entrance, his eyes heavy from boredom. Alex flashed his janitor's ID, one that still bore the Shore and Hunt logo, and muttered something about CEO emergency cleanup order. The guard barely looked up before waving him through. Inside, the garage was half-lit, the hum of generators echoing off the concrete. He parked beside a row of sleek black cars, and there a familiar sight stopped him cold. Claire's car. Her driver's door was still open. He stepped out, pulse pounding. Her phone lay on the seat. The screen cracked. That wasn't like her. "Claire," he called softly, but his voice only bounced back at him, swallowed by the concrete. He followed the faint sound of footsteps, heels against metal, toward the elevator. When the door slid open, he pressed PH for penthouse and watched the numbers climb. His reflection in the mirror wall looked like a man who'd lived 3 lives in 1 week. When the doors opened, he stepped into silence. The penthouse was vast, white marble floors, walls of glass overlooking the city, the faint buzz of security monitors. It smelled faintly of bourbon and burnt ozone, as if lightning had struck somewhere close. Then he heard it. A man's voice, low, controlled, dangerous. "You don't get to threaten me, Claire." He moved closer, staying behind one of the glass partitions. In the center of the room stood Ethan, immaculate in his gray suit, his jaw tense. Across from him, Claire, holding a small pistol, her hands trembling. "I don't want your money," she said. "I just want you to stop." Ethan chuckled. "Stop? Claire, you're standing in a penthouse built on blood money. You signed every transfer, every deal. You think anyone will believe you weren't complicit?" "I have proof," she said, voice unsteady but fierce. "And I'm not afraid to use it." "Oh, I know you have proof." Ethan smiled thinly. "That's why I called someone to take care of it." A sound behind Alex, a shift of air. He spun just in time to duck. A man in black swung a baton where his head had been. The blow cracked against the glass wall. Alex tackled him, adrenaline flooding his veins. The fight was messy, brutal. He grabbed the nearest object, a metal bar from a broken chair, and slammed it against the man's arm. The weapon clattered away. In the chaos, Ethan turned sharply. "What the hell?" "Let her go, sure." Alex shouted, stepping into the room, blood trickling down his temple. Ethan's face twisted in recognition. "Ah, the janitor." Claire's eyes widened. "Alex, what are you doing here?" "Saving you," he said through gritted teeth. Ethan smirked. "How romantic. Unfortunately, you both signed your own endings." He drew a gun from his jacket. Everything slowed. Claire screamed. Alex lunged. The gun went off. Once. Twice. The sound tore through the penthouse like thunder. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Ethan stumbled backward, clutching his chest, eyes wide, blood blooming across his shirt like ink spreading in water. He hit the glass wall behind him, and the view of the city fractured as he slid down. The gun fell from his hand. Claire stood frozen, her own pistol shaking. Smoke curled from the barrel. Alex caught her before she fell. "It's over," he said, breathless. "It's over." But she was trembling violently. "You don't understand," she whispered. He wasn't bluffing. "There's more. Files. People. They'll come for me next." "Then we'll run," he said. "We'll take the evidence to Jordan. Expose everything." She shook her head, tears streaking down her face. "You can't. Once it's public, they'll kill you too." "Let them try," he said fiercely. "I've lost everything already." She looked up at him. The woman who had once broken him now looked like someone barely holding herself together. "Why are you still helping me?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Because somewhere between the lies, I still believed you." For a moment, she just stared at him, and then, for the first time in months, she smiled. It wasn't joy. It was sorrow softened by love. Outside, sirens began to wail, faint at first, then growing louder. She looked toward the city lights and whispered, "Promise me one thing. Whatever happens next, don't let them rewrite this." "I promise," he said. Then she handed him a small silver key, the kind that belonged to a safety deposit box. "That's where the truth is." Before he could speak, the elevator dinged again. More footsteps, voices, security. Claire turned, facing the noise, gun still in hand. "Go, Alex." "I'm not leaving you." "Go," she cried. "Please." Their eyes met one last time, an entire history between them, all the love and betrayal condensed into one impossible second. Then she turned toward the doorway, and Alex ran, through the back corridor, down the emergency stairs, into the night. He didn't look back. He couldn't. By the time he reached his car, sirens filled the street. He drove away just as the first police car screeched to a stop outside the obsidian tower. And in the rearview mirror, lightning flashed, illuminating the glass byway as past and future both burned. Rain came hard and sudden. It lashed against the windshield as Alex sped down the empty highway, the flash drive and silver key sitting on the passenger seat like loaded weapons. His chest heaved, the smell of gunpowder and fear still clinging to his clothes. He didn't know if Claire was alive. The sirens had grown distant, then disappeared entirely. The city receded behind him, its towers now just trembling lights in the storm, but her voice lingered. "Promise me, don't let them rewrite this." He pulled off a highway at a deserted gas station and sat there in silence, rain beating down like a verdict. For the first time since this began, the exhaustion hit him. Every emotion, anger, grief, disbelief, bled together into a hollow ache. He'd lost his job, his peace, his sense of who she was. But somewhere in all that ruin, he'd found the one thing he couldn't let go of, the truth. It was dawn when he reached his brother Jordan's apartment again. The streets were washed clean by the storm, the world quiet in that heavy, uncertain way that comes after chaos. Jordan opened the door, bleary-eyed. "Jesus, Alex, what happened to you?" Alex handed him the flash drive and key. "This is everything. Files, transfers, names. And that key. It opens a deposit box at First National. She said it's where the rest of the evidence is." Jordan's eyebrows shot up. "She gave you this." She was trying to stop him. "But Ethan's dead." Jordan froze. "What do you mean, dead?" "She shot him." The silence that followed was almost suffocating. Jordan rubbed his face, pacing the small living room. "If this is what I think it is, that drive alone could bring down half the city's financial elite. But, Alex..." "What?" "They'll come after you two. You were in that building. You're part of the story now." Alex leaned against the wall, eyes hollow. "I don't care anymore. Let them come." Jordan studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You always did have a death wish for truth." "I have a promise," Alex said quietly. Jordan didn't ask what he meant. He just nodded, slid the flash drive into his computer, and began decrypting. 2 days later, the world exploded. The headlines were everywhere. Shaw and Hunt CEO under investigation after partner's death. Offshore laundering network exposed, government officials implicated. Anonymous source leaks files that could reshape corporate law. Alex watched it unfold from the back room of a cheap motel on the city's edge. He didn't step outside, didn't answer calls. The television's blue light painted his face as reporters repeated the same words again and again: embezzlement, conspiracy, corruption, suicide. Suicide. That was how they labeled Ethan Shaw's death. Self-inflicted gunshot wound after confrontation. There was no mention of Claire, no photo, no quote, no confirmation. Just a single line. The company CEO Claire Hunt, is cooperating with authorities and remains under protective custody. Protective custody. Alex stared at the screen until the words blurred. He should have felt relief, but instead there was just emptiness, the kind that comes after every war when the last bullet's fired and the silence is too big to fill. He turned off the TV. The motel room went dark except for the faint hum of the neon sign outside. 3 weeks passed. He started working again, not at Shaw and Hunt, of course. A small community center downtown needed a custodian. The pay was barely enough to survive, but it kept his hands busy, his mind quiet. Some nights, when the building was empty, he'd find himself standing by the tall windows, watching the rain slide down the glass, thinking of her, what she said in that last moment, how her eyes looked when she said go. He told himself it was over, but deep down, he knew ghosts don't vanish just because you stop chasing them. Then one night, as he was locking up, the front door buzzed. A delivery. No sender. No return address. Just his name written in clean, familiar handwriting. He opened it slowly. Inside was a small black envelope. And inside that, a photo. It was taken on a beach somewhere warm. Claire, standing barefoot in the sand, wind in her hair, looking toward the ocean. On the back, written in the same hand. They can't rewrite what we lived. See. He sat down on the bench, the photo trembling between his fingers. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, quietly, he smiled, the kind of smile that carried both sorrow and peace. He folded the photo, slipped it into his wallet beside a faded picture of his son, and whispered, "You kept your promise, Claire." Outside, dawn began to break, slow and golden, washing the city clean again. And for the first time in a long time, Alex felt something close to freedom. Not forgiveness, not closure, but truth, raw, imperfect, and finally his. He picked up his mop, turned out the lights, and walked down the quiet hall as the world woke up outside.